Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Good War Project. Firstly, apologies for a little bit of a delay in starting. We've had some IT issues this end, but good to have you all with us this afternoon for our cost of living crisis live stream on what is Fuel Poverty Awareness Day. So stark statistics coming out of 8.4 million people being in fuel poverty from April. So bit of a depressing start for us, but we've got a wonderful panel for you. So we've got Jan Short with us, who is the General Secretary of the National Pensioners Convention. We've got Belle Ribeiro Addy, MP for Streatham. And we've got Tom Brook-Bullard, who is the Senior Policy Researcher at Citizens Advice. So as I say, wonderful panel for you this afternoon on a really important topic. So as I say, it's Fuel Poverty Awareness Day, but energy is just one of many things that we need as humans, and it's just one part of the picture of the cost of living crisis that we're seeing, which really is just an extraordinary crisis. We've got inflation. That's the price at which, I always think it's worth explaining, the price at which goods and services rise. So i.e. they rise in price, and they're rising to levels that we've not seen since the 1980s. We've got interest rates being risen by the Bank of England by the highest amount in about the last 30 years. Food prices are up. Energy prices are up, forcing many to not heat their homes during this winter, which leads people to the risk of living in cold, dark and damp homes. We've got house prices at exceptionally high levels, along with rent prices high as well, so that people are unsure whether they're even going to be able to keep a roof over their heads. And that affects the youngest and those on low incomes very often the most. Wages are stagnating. We've got people out on the streets protesting or striking, calling for fairer wages. And so in short, we know that millions of people around the country are struggling to just get through from day to day. So our panel are here today to talk about the cost of living crisis, what that means for everybody, and to discuss what we can do to solve it. So first question, I've got a number of questions to ask our panel that we'll discuss, but throughout the talk, I wonder if our audience, if they have any questions, if they would like to send them through to us. We've got little elves in the background collecting those questions, and we'll have questions to our panel to start with for about the first 45 minutes. And then we'll take questions from the audience in the last 15. So do send them through. You can send them to us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. So please do send your questions through for the panel. So the first question is this the worst cost of living crisis in a generation? And I'm going to put that to Belle, if that's okay with you, Belle. So is this the worst cost of living crisis that we've had in a generation? And what are your constituents coming to you with in terms of issues that they're facing?
It absolutely is the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. The figures don't lie as much as the government does, unfortunately. And we're seeing people coming to us with things that you wouldn't have expected before. Obviously, over the past 10 years, we've seen a massive decline in public spending, and that's generally impacted people's living standards. But over the past couple of years, we've seen massive issues in terms of the amount of support that people can get for regular things. So the major thing that's happening in a way that we hadn't expected before is that people can't afford to do basic things. One of the main things we're here to talk about is energy. They can't afford to heat their homes because of the increase. Benefits are not necessarily covering the cost of living. Wages aren't rising with the price of inflation. And my area of London is one which has a very high number of renters. Rents are going up. No surprise, because mortgages have gone up hugely. That's happening. And actually, food poverty is a major issue. We have more food banks in this country now than we have McDonald's, and given that we have McDonald's in just about every high street, that just shows where we are. And the idea that we'd be in this situation in what is, while slipping slowly again and again, the 6th largest economy in the world, makes no sense. In a country like this, people can't afford, working people, and we have to remember this is not just people who are impoverished in one way or the other and may have to, for some reason, be claiming benefits because they're out of work. These are people that are working. People who are working, earning a wage, cannot afford to feed their families, cannot afford to pay their rents, and cannot afford to heat their homes.
You might be on mute, Tamara.
I was warned of that before we started. Thank you, Tom. Tom, so I'll ask you, since you're off mute, the citizens' advice. So from your perspective, do you think this is the worst cost of living crisis we've seen, and what sort of issues are you seeing people coming and seeking advice for?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Belle has said there, I just completely agree with. I think in terms of what we're seeing across our service, the crisis that we're seeing now is absolutely unprecedented, at least in my lifetime. I think, like, one thing that we've been trying to do a lot more at Citizens Advice is to be more kind of public and share our data. And one of the things that is so valuable in terms of our policy work is our access to real-time data about the issues that people are coming to us, both in our offices, but also on phone lines and through our website. And I think I'll just pick out a couple of kind of two indicators which I think really hammer home just how serious this crisis is for people on the ground. So the first one is the numbers of people that we're referring to food banks and charitable support. So if we compare that to the previous kind of 3 years, we've already surpassed where we were at the end of each of those years. We passed about June this year. We're referring around 2 people every minute to crisis support. So that's referring people to food banks or other emergency charitable support. So I think that's really, really serious. So that's nearly 170,000 people who we've referred this year to food banks and crisis support. That's, we're not the only people doing that as well. So the figure is much higher beyond that as well. The other one I want to kind of hammer home, and I think in many ways is even more stark, is the numbers of people who we're speaking to who are unable to top up their prepayment meters. So this year we've seen more people who can't afford to top up their prepayment meter than the whole of the previous 5 years combined. We're not even at the end of December yet, and as you can tell, the weather is getting much, much worse. And I think it is kind of useful to kind of reflect on what that means when someone's unable to top up their prepayment meter. That's people kind of sitting at home in the dark. That's people sitting at home who are unable to afford to heat their home, unable to cook meals, unable to do all of the things that kind of are needed for a healthy kind of basic lifestyle. So I think it's really, I would completely agree with Belle. This is absolutely the worst cost of living crisis that we've experienced in a generation.
Thank you. And what about you, Jan? How do you feel, and what are your membership telling you?
Well, it is. We've been through the 70s, and of course we were a lot younger then. We had the 3-day week and planned power cuts. And you're a lot younger, you get through it. Now we're a lot older. And I think for what Tom has just said around prepayment meters, our major concern is those on traditional prepayment meters, when they have no money to put on their card or their key, then it's automatically cut off. And I'm wondering, does anybody ever know who that person is? because if they don't, those people, sorry, I should have switched that off. Always, isn't it? Sorry about that. Yeah, you get. Does anybody know who those people are? Because unlike smart meters, where you're connected to your provider, and they should and could do something about it, you may never see the light of day again, and you may die actually in your home. So that is a major issue for us. And of course, pensioners are like a lot of other people on fixed income. And when you've got fixed income, it doesn't take much to put your budget out of kilter. You only need one thing to go up in price and you're struggling. So older people have always made a decision in the wintertime whether to heat or eat. But we've come to a point now, I think, where there's nothing else to cut. Everything is so expensive. Older people still have mortgages. A lot of older people rent, and they rent in the private sector where there's not so many nice landlords as local authorities. And the whole thing around, we've had people say, I've turned my heating off and I'm not going to turn it on again. That is major safety and health risk. I have other people saying, well, we'll live on sandwiches for 2 days a week and then cook for 1 day, and if you have no money, if you're all electric, you've got absolutely nothing. If you have a gas meter, an electric meter, maybe you can pay for one. But I think overall, it's kind of something that as older people, although we've lived through it, way, way back, this is something very, very, very different. And we know people who use their bus pass through the day and they go on buses, tours around, and they may have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee somewhere, and then they go home and then they go straight to bed because they just can't afford to heat their home. And those people with really complex health issues, they don't just need heat in the winter, they need it all year round. Yeah. And the money is only for 6 months. So this is going to go on and on for those people. And people who have life-saving equipment in their homes. It's costing them an actual fortune. And I think at the moment, we're not seeing anything like the support that should be given. Our pensions have gone up. We don't get that money till April. By April, we don't know where inflation will be. That money is needed now. Yeah. I mean, the majority of pensioners today are on the very low basic state pension, which currently is £141 a week and will go up to 156 in April. And there are other pensioners who are just above pension credit limit, a couple of pounds. And every time something goes up, they're the ones that are squeezed. They're right in the middle. Yeah. So there needs to be a more comprehensive look at how we look at a better system of supporting and protecting those that are most in need. And that is any age, not just the older age society of this country. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Jan. And that kind of quite nicely leads me on to the next question that I've got, which is around the support that people should be receiving. What should people be receiving, and could and should the government, central and local government, should they be doing more to support people? Belle, shall I come back to you?
I think obviously we should be doing whatever we can to support people. And the unfortunate thing is that the government keep making these announcements as if they are doing something to cover up for the huge disaster that we find ourselves in. They keep talking about their budget, their most recent budget, and how great it is and how much it's going to help people. But even the little things like their so-called minimum wage is not enough to meet the bare minimum that people have, and the so-called levelling up agenda, for example, hasn't really included poorer places in London, with the idea that things are need to be moved to other places if there's not poverty in inner city areas as well. A lot of money is being spent. It has been spent incorrectly, and we've seen that right down from the pandemic, where a lot of the government's and Conservative Party donors received a lot of money via contracts and things like that. And we're now finding ourselves in an economic crisis with a recession, and the government are now telling us there is no more money after they're able to find all of the money for that. And in order to recuperate these funds, they are essentially taxing people more. And this is not just the richest people, it's everybody. They're causing a really serious issue in terms of the cuts that they're making right across our public services. There is more that they could do to support people in their everyday living, but they're simply not doing it. And the minimal energy rebates that they've put forward are just not enough. I'm somebody who'd advocate for a windfall tax, and a lot of people keep saying when it comes to energy, obviously a windfall tax is not enough. I think there should be windfall taxes for as long as the windfall exists, but beyond that, we should ultimately be taking all of our public utilities back into public ownership. If these companies are making so much money off what's meant to be a public good, it's clear that they shouldn't be doing that, firstly, and that all of these funds should be recuperated when they make these profits. These should be put back into the service. With all of these energy companies and utility companies, what we're finding is that whenever they make this money, they're not putting it back into investing in the service. And whenever something goes wrong, the government ends up having to pull them out of it. That's why we're seeing higher water bills, higher energy bills, higher transport bills, if we even go into transport, because people can't even afford to get themselves to work with the amount it costs, definitely in the capital. And all we're seeing all the time is the government bailing out these larger companies when they should be investing in these services that ultimately keep the country running and keep everybody in the services and that they need. So government definitely not doing enough, could be doing enough if they were thinking more about public services, funding these public services, supporting these public services, making them for the public good, and ultimately working for people other than their rich mates that are shareholders and owners of these large companies.
Tom, as sort of a representative of one of the biggest advice organisations, your organisation tends to be the one that people turn to when they want to know what support is available. So how do you feel about the support that's provided by government and local authorities, and whether they should and could be providing more?
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I think one thing I'd just like to emphasise before kind of going into the question around kind of whether or not there is enough support available to people is just to urge anyone who is worried about making ends meet to look into what support is available to them. Like there are a lot of cases where people aren't receiving the support that they are entitled to. So I'd really urge people to go on our website and to take a look and have a think about like the benefits that they might be entitled to, or go on something like Turn to Us, where you can very easily like fill in your kind of broad details and get a sense of what benefits you might be entitled to. So I think that's something I really want to emphasize up front. In terms of kind of the support that is already available to people, the support the government has announced, what I would say is that like we were pleasantly surprised with the content of the autumn statement, and there were lots of good things in there. Like we were very happy to see that that people on benefits weren't going to be seeing a real term cut in their means tested benefit entitlements. So I think uprating benefits with inflation, really positive, really glad to see that. It kind of cautiously, we were pleased to see the commitment to continue the energy price guarantee even at a higher level of £3,000 a year. But I do think it's important to remember that £2,500 a year now is what we're kind of sitting at. It's important to remember that a year ago it was 1,300. So that is a huge difference, and that's why we're seeing such huge unaffordability in the energy market at the moment. 3,000 is even more serious. We're pleased that, like, to some extent, that has been mitigated by additional payments to people on means tested benefits. But a lot of that benefit is going to be kind of wiped out by price rises elsewhere. So I think we really do need more support. It's also really important to remember that people who need support aren't always on means tested benefits. So there's lots of people, like people on no recourse to public funds. Lots of people now in this kind of, this is using kind of quite an old terminology, I guess, but like the just about managing a group of people, like people on low incomes who don't receive benefits. I think that's a huge concern, and those are people that we're going to be really, I think, seeing requiring crisis support in the coming months as well. There's other things as well. I mean, we're really urging the government to reconsider its real terms cut to local housing allowance. As has been mentioned before, like rents are already really unaffordable, and that's one way that it could be made more affordable to people in local housing. I think one thing that I really do want to kind of hammer home again, and we have talked about this already, but is people on prepayment meters. There are kind of these longer term solutions that we were talking about before in terms of energy efficiency and things like that, which are part of the picture of solving fuel poverty or reducing fuel poverty in the longer term. But in the shorter term, this winter, I think we really just need to think about how can we keep people on supply, how can we keep people warm, and that's why we're really urging Ofgem and the government to consider a winter ban on energy companies for forcing people onto prepayment meters. We've got loads of evidence to suggest that, like, the proper processes aren't being followed to get people onto these prepayment meters anyway. Lots of people should be exempt from being on a prepayment meter, but again, we're seeing in our case notes people with long-term health conditions who are on prepayment meters who need that energy in order to treat their condition, people who are being disconnected with children under 5 years old. All of these things shouldn't be happening anyway under the license conditions. But in the short term, we just really need to put an end to that practice for this winter, or we really are. A lot of people are already facing a lot of hardship, but it will be even worse.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, the prepayment meter situation has been all over the media sort of in the last sort of couple of months, and the dire stories that everyone's been reading about people being forced onto prepayment meters, court warrants being applied for by suppliers so that suppliers or their agents can force their way into people's homes, literally force their way into people's homes and swap their meters for a prepayment meter if they've got, as Jan said earlier, like the old style meters and not a smart meter, is absolutely appalling. It's something that Good Law Project are looking into. If we are looking for people, if anyone who's watching today has been notified by their supplier that they're considering a prepayment meter or considering applying for a warrant, then do contact us. We're looking into legal ways of challenging that. And as Thomas said, we have called, along with other fuel poverty organisations as well, for a stop to this force fitting of prepayment meters, and potentially just because thousands of applications for warrants are being made every month into magistrates' courts, and so that's thousands that probably aren't being considered on a case-by-case basis to make sure that they are fulfilling those obligations that Thomas just said that they do have, and making sure that people who really it wouldn't be safe for them to have a prepayment meter aren't having them fitted. Jan, so coming to you on the same question, in terms of the support that's being provided at the moment, is there more that the government, central and local government as well, could be and should be doing more of?
I totally agree with Belle. Anything that is around, life enhancement, like your energy, your water, housing, it should be publicly owned. Yeah, we don't own a thing in this country very much, and you're at the behest now of the global markets and global providers, and they will go with their country, not ours. So I think, public ownership of energy particularly is really, really important. And Belle is also right. The cuts in local government budgets, you've seen real cuts in services. And during COVID, there were people, carers. We've got older carers who may have ill health themselves, but they're caring for someone else. Yeah. And as COVID set in and people started working from home, there was very little support and help out there for carers who particularly were looking after someone with dementia. And we had stories of people in despair, not knowing how to cope when, lockdown and that kind of thing. So the issue is around proper funding for local authorities, proper funding for public services. It was very well and good for the public servants to stand up on the front line in COVID and put their lives at risk. But now they don't want to even give them a nice, a good pay rise to welcome them back into, what is coming to normal. I think also the energy companies have a part to play, making massive profits. I mean, we're in a really stupid situation, I think, of taxpayers paying the energy companies to pay for our, energy support allowance on our bills. I mean, what's that about? That shouldn't happen. It should come direct from the energy providers. They're making enough profit. There should be a percentage taken at source and put right down into the customer, so that the customer does actually, have something and benefit from it. When we wrote to the regulator, we talked about removing the 5% VAT on energy. Energy is not a luxury. Energy is an essential. And 5% VAT, it will save some money, but when it comes off your bill, each bill or through the year, that's something. We question the cost of standing charges, just for a meter to be in your house. I know they have to be maintained, they have to be read, they have to be replaced if they go wrong, but it's a huge amount of money that the energy companies are making on standing charges that could well do customers, a good benefit. In terms of, is it enough? No, it isn't enough, because the government needs to get a grip and it needs to get control of what's going on. And they've allowed this to happen over years. And we've been looking at sustainable energy, sustainable fuel. This budget, they've only just come out with the fact that they are going to put money into insulating homes. That should have been happening a long time ago, right? They did some and then they cut the budget and then they took it away altogether. That should be happening. That should have been happening right in the beginning. And, what are they doing about sustainable fuels? And they go to a COP27 and say, oh, yes, we'll sign up to that. Then they come back and say, oh, we're hoping a drift mine. Excuse me, that's fossil fuel. I don't understand where their thinking is, and I'm not sure they've got the thinking, to do around it. But I think there's a lot more, not just money, but a lot more for the future. I mean, we just don't stand for the pensioners of today. We stand for people like yourselves that will retire in the future. We want them to have a better future, and we want them to have, sustainable energy, affordable energy. So there's a lot that the government could be doing that they're not. And I agree also with Tom in terms of, we say to people, apply for pension credit, even if you think you might not be entitled to it. You never know, right? Doesn't hurt to ask. If you don't ask, you don't know, you don't get anything. So no, it isn't enough, and it's not for long enough. Like I say, a lot of older people need heat, not just in the winter time, but also throughout the year because of their complex health conditions, as would disabled people, as will young children that, need to be kept, healthy for a longer life. One thing that we picked up that isn't helpful in the autumn statement was the delay on the care cap. Yeah. If you're paying for care, you're paying extortionate rates for care. And delaying the cap for 2 years just absolutely makes that financial burden so much more. You know, I've talked about older carers. Older carers actually have a layer of poverty on top of the role that they take as a carer. And what we call informal or family carers actually save the government over £130 billion a year, which is enough actually to set up a new NHS and run it properly. So there's a lot more they can do, and a lot more that we want to see done by the regulator. The regulator needs to start standing up for customers.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, I think that's a good thing to end on. Definitely, the regulator needs to stand up for customers. You know, that is obviously their role. You know, their responsibility is first and foremost to consumers. Yes, part of that is making sure that the market is stable, but also, you know, it is to the vulnerable as well. So couldn't echo that more. You saying about dementia, my nan had dementia. I can't imagine what people must have gone through caring for somebody with dementia during the pandemic. That must have been really, really tough for people. And also, so my background is as a fuel poverty officer in local government, and fuel absolutely is not a luxury. I always think that if we have no energy, we are in a cold, damp stone box. That's basically a cave. That's basically what people go back into if they're in fuel poverty. And if you go into a home that's not being heated, you feel the difference in the cold. It's not just a home that's normally heated, it's cold. But when you go into a home that's not being heated at all, the brickwork is cold to the house, and it has that fridge-like feel. It's completely different. So yeah. What I was going to ask next was, I thought, Belle, maybe you might have a view on this first, was that the cost of living crisis and the sort of the reason we're in a cost of living crisis, it's a global issue. Governments around the world have brought in support packages and measures because there's a cost of living crisis. That research has shown that Brexit has put, where's my statistic on this, but has put an average of £210 has put £210 the average household bill. And obviously, when we talk about energy, then often the government will talk about Russia invading Ukraine and how that has affected the energy market. I wonder whether you have a thought on the background to this cost of living crisis, and whether Brexit and Ukraine do have as much of a part to play as maybe sometimes we're sort of told.
Well, it has actually definitely had an impact, but not to the extent that the government are making it seem as if it has. And if we're talking about comparing ourselves to other countries, what we know is that we are the one that's set to have the least growth, and everybody is across Europe in particular is suffering the effects of general cost of living, the fallout after COVID, and the energy crisis from coming out from the war from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So if all of those other countries in Europe are suffering those effects, why are we the only ones that have had no growth since the pandemic has generally ended? Why are we the ones in this position? Well, it's very, very clear that it's because of Brexit. And one of the things that's really irked me about Brexit is the fact that nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that it's all gone horribly wrong. And this is not about leave or remain. Leave or remain is a conversation that we've had again and again a few years ago, and it's very much done. This is about the disastrous deal that was put forward. Now, a lot of people think that in December 2020, members of Parliament voted on a deal, and we were again told, you're either going to vote for a deal or we're going to crash out of the EU. That's not what happened. We voted on an implementation agreement. The deal was done the day before Boris Johnson and his incompetent ministers put the deal together with no say from those of us who are represented. We didn't even have an opportunity to look into it. So it's not about leave or remain. It's about the offer we got given, and a lot of the things that happened, including moving ourselves from the single market, including ending freedom of movement, including all of these different things, particularly when it comes to services. I know there are a lot of providers in my constituency and people who worked across Europe who don't have those opportunities anymore. All of that's caused massive issues, and quite literally Brexit has led to us having higher prices of food in the supermarket. UK exports have gone down. Trade overall is disastrous, but apparently we're not going to say what the truth is, and that is that it's been a complete mess, and that's why you hear some people talking about doing some kind of Swiss type deal or something of the like. But we're not going to move forward unless we accept the implications of Brexit and perhaps do what we can to work to change what has happened. Anytime anybody starts to talk about it, it seems like we're reverting back to the leave or remain argument, but it's very, very basic. The way in which we have this deal has been implemented, it isn't working. And we need to look at that. The government can change things if they want to. If we look at what they're trying to do now with the Northern Ireland Protocol, there are a range of different things we can see. They seem to have the power to change, but they're willing to pretend as if nothing's happened to save face, even if the people of this country are suffering from the effects of it. So yes, absolutely. Definitely issues coming out from the pandemic, definitely issues following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But every other country in Europe is weathering the storm. We simply can't, because we've left our biggest trading partner and we're not willing to talk about what's gone wrong with it.
Thank you, Belle. Just before I move to Tom, who was nodding during that, just a reminder, do send your questions in via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube, please. Tom, would you like to give us your thoughts? As I say, I could see you nodding along to Belle there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess the question of kind of how we got here and where the responsibility lies, a lot of that I think is sits outside of my area of expertise and pay grade. But I think like it obviously is clear, and no one can really deny that the Ukraine war has had a huge impact, particularly on energy prices, but also on food prices as well. I think what feels kind of salient to me, and I can speak to probably with a greater level of expertise, is what it has revealed about our energy system and about our benefit system and about kind of the state of people's finances more broadly. So I think that the first thing is that it's really revealed is we really need to address our reliance on natural gas and fossil fuels more broadly. And you know, one way to achieve the way to achieve both our net zero goals, but also energy security is through investment in renewable energy and storage. So that's one thing I'd really like to emphasize. Another is, I think, that has become very clear and that we've known for a long time, but I think now becomes an urgent issue, is the energy efficiency of our housing stock. So we have some of the worst energy efficient homes in Europe, and that is particularly the case in places like the private rental sector. So I don't think it's never been more urgent, both from a cost of living perspective, but also from a net zero goals perspective, for us to urgently upgrade our housing stock, and that requires investment, but it also requires sort of guidance from the centre, clear advice for people, and crucially, actually, like when we think about poor energy efficiency, a huge amount of that is in the private rental sector. So we really need to empower people in the private rental sector or incentivize landlords to make those changes to their homes. And that's how we're going to kind of fix these things in the long term. The other kind of thing that I think was really highlighted by the cost of living crisis, but particularly the energy crisis, is just how unresilient our energy retail market is to these kind of shocks. So, for example, the biggest example of that is like what it's really highlighted is Within our market, lots of energy suppliers were pricing at really unrealistically low prices, and running unsustainable business models that were predicated on gas prices staying low, and they didn't. And obviously the most extreme example of that is with Bulb. And we'd been raising alarms about this kind of pricing and this kind of irresponsible management of energy companies for a long time. And Ofgem didn't heed that advice. And now the taxpayer is being saddled with a £6.5 billion bill because of the way that Bulb was managed. So I think the thing I'd really like to say is, like, it emphasises just how seriously we need to take the regulation of these markets. A lot of the kind of indicators of these things being poorly run actually were in the customer service of these companies. So we just need to, I think, going forward, Ofgem's approach to compliance and regulation really needs to improve if we're going to protect people. I'm going to end there. I feel like I've slightly taken it in a different direction, but I think those are kind of the lessons that I've learned from the crisis.
Lovely, thank you. Jan, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think absolutely right, Tom. As I said before, the government needs to get a grip, and it needs to look at affordable, sustainable energy. And while it's doing that, it needs to really regulate in favour of the customer, not the energy provider. And I think, I won't talk about Brexit, we don't have a policy, but I would agree with Belle that the conversation that needs to go on now is not about leave or remain. It's about what is good and what is bad about the deal we've got and how we can put it right.
Lovely, thanks. Okay, so we've had a few questions in from people, so just making sure that we stay to time. I think we'll turn to those now if you're all happy to do that. So the first question we have is, will we look back at austerity and realise it was a big cause of our troubles today? Oh, and little elves are putting that on the screen for us, so that's helpful. So yeah, would any of you like to answer that question?
Absolutely. I think that's perhaps the easiest one-word answer. If they'd want more explanation, it's clear that where you invest more in public good, you actually yield more. If people had better pay, if there were better services, people would be able to use them better, more would be put into them, there'd be more investment, and more would come back to the public coffers, and it'd be better for everybody. That's just basically it. Austerity was a bad idea. It hasn't benefited anybody, hasn't benefited the economy.
Tom or Jan, would you like to go next? Jan?
Yeah, I would agree with Belle, but if you start freezing the wages of public servants, and you also then put in measures that end up cutting people away from that service because they take staff away, people are made redundant, that money doesn't circulate the economy again. So your economy shrinks, and I cannot for the life of me understand why this government doesn't see that investment pays, right? Like Belle said, if you invest in your public service, right, you're investing in the population of your country. The population of the country is better health. Oh, I've got my window cleaner coming. I'm really sorry. It's like what a day. So you're investing in the economy, and that economy rolls around. It's like older people using their bus passes, right? They use their bus pass to go and see family and friends or go shopping. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So, they're on the bus, they go and see their family, their friends, they might have a cup of tea, a piece of cake, whatever. They do their volunteering. Yeah, they go hospital visiting. And a lot of larger charities tell us that without older people volunteering, they couldn't actually manage. You stop all that, by making things too difficult and too costly, and people can't invest in the economy the way they are. So my local high streets are devoid of shops. You know, yes, COVID had a part to play with that going online, but older people like to go and see the goods that they're buying, and they can't anymore. So it's about reinvestment. If you don't reinvest, you get nothing back.
Tom, did you want to come in on this one? I don't know whether you want to. The next question was going to be, and I wonder whether you might want to bring them in together, but it's whether there's alternative models of support that could directly empower communities to lead on decision making.
I'm happy to take the first one, or like a version of the first one. I think I'll leave the second one to other people. But I think in terms of the question of austerity, I think like what is clear to me is kind of looking forward. Is we've talked a lot, I think, about the kind of the urgent, sharp end of the cost of living crisis, but I think something that's increasingly worrying us at Citizens Advice, and that we're going to be tracking more and more, particularly as we get into the Christmas period, which is a serious problem for this issue, is debt. So I think like what we do know is that once you get into debt, it is very hard to get out of debt. So if we're not providing people the sufficient support that they need now, and they end up in debt, that causes really, really long-term issues and kind of economic scarring. And what I would kind of want to emphasize is the cost of even getting out of debt. So it costs something like £600 to file for bankruptcy, or it's also very expensive for an insolvency order and things like that. So I think what we're concerned about is that if we don't address this problem now, it has knock-on effects down the line for years, if not decades, for lots of people's lives. So it's not a question of just now, it is a question of looking to the future. And then I think I will leave the second question for anyone else who wants to jump in on it.
So yeah, the second question is are there alternative models of support that could directly empower communities to lead on decision making? Belle, was that one that maybe you might like to take as a politician?
But my first thought about alternative models of support, I thought about universal basic income, and I think that would make a massive difference overall in terms of people being able to make their own decisions on where they spend their money. But in terms of models of actual decision making, I really do believe some of the best examples of where things have gone better have been when more onus has been put on people working within their own local authorities. Different areas of the country have different needs, and where local authorities have had more power to do certain things, they've been able to achieve a lot more. I think about the Preston model, and I think about how that's worked. I think about areas in where they've been empowered more to be able to build more housing. That's made a massive difference. I'm not sure if that's where they were going for in terms of communities making more decision making, but that more localized model of working has made a massive difference. A lot of the time, whenever things are decided by the government in terms of what's been ring fenced because of austerity and because of handing down particular measures in terms of what's allowed to be spent on what, it's very, very difficult for local communities to be able to, I suppose, tailor what it is that's needed by them, perhaps quite simply based on the demographics of the population and what their needs are.
Jan, have you got any thoughts on that one?
Well, I think, Belle's right. This is where levelling up comes in, isn't it? Where there's an input of funding that will hopefully be of benefit to local people. But I think in the main, it is about local people engaging themselves with the things that matter. And we always advocate that if there's something wrong, and you don't like it, then you speak about it and you do something about it. And that's where most of our campaigns come from in our regions, because they are local to each area. But overall, I think the public do need to have a much, much better, more open, democratic kind of conversation with their local authorities and with the government. That does not happen because we're seen to not have the understanding. Why don't we have the understanding? We live it. We don't have a millionaire's salary. We don't have, a billionaire's salary. We are living where we can best, and in the communities that we live in, it's about community support to make things happen. So I think there's how you actually structure that is quite difficult. But from the point of view of older people, we engage where we feel that there's a reason to engage. And Belle might have actually received some letters from some of our members in your constituency, particularly about the triple lock, and you'll be getting some more about other issues. But
I welcome them.
yeah, that's the way that we engage through that political system, is through our MPs. And some MPs are very good. Some disagree with what we're doing, so don't go anywhere. But over the triple lock, I have to say, we had quite an overwhelming amount of support from all parties, not just the party that people would expect us to be allied to. We're not. We're a non-party affiliated organisation, and if Labour were doing what the Conservative government is doing now, you'd be seeing us at your door. So I think it is about the engagement that people feel they can have, and it's about educating where that engagement can be. And I think that's down to local authorities, and the local councillors, who should be welcoming engagement, should be asking the questions and looking at the answers. And there does need to be a model of where people can engage. And I think certainly in Newcastle it was happening before COVID. After COVID, I'm not so sure. And that might be the case across the country. Yeah.
Just to say on that, the number of people that elect a local councillor or even an MP are really not representative of even those registered to vote, let alone the actual amount of people living in an area. So you can have a rough example, an electorate in an area that might have 12,000 people, and if you're lucky, 1,500 participate in a particular election for councillors in that ward. And same goes with MPs in terms of percentage. It's slightly higher because general elections tend to have more people voting in them. But the reality is we often have a government for which less than 40% of the population voted for. And right now we have a prime minister which 0.0 something percent of the population, oh no, they didn't even vote for him. That's it. It was decided by, so that's 0.000 if you decide the number of Conservative MPs that eventually coronated our current Prime Minister. So our electoral system and our democracy overall is broken in that it doesn't necessarily engage everybody. And I think if we did, you'd have better representatives and you'd have better representation.
Yeah, I agree. Having worked with local politicians and MPs as well, they all appreciate and feel that they have a mandate when people speak to them. So even if you didn't vote for your elected politician, I always think that if you speak to them, they still represent you and they still feel they have a mandate if their local people actually make them aware of their feelings. I'm looking at the time, so because we started 5 minutes past, and just the last question, I thought if we make this one short, but maybe try and make it positive as well. The last question I thought we'd deal with is people are suffering and feeling powerless. What can we do? And I wonder if we just finish on that question and maybe try and just leave with a little bit of hope that there is some support out there and we do understand what people are going through. Does anybody want to feel positive and want to take that one as a sign off? Lovely. Jan's feeling positive.
Yeah, I think people should understand that they can make a difference. I think people think when everything's going wrong like this, what can we do? You can do something. You know, you can change it. Tomorrow there's a big demonstration in London with the Fuel Poverty Action Coalition. It's down in Parliament Square. If you live in London, get down there 10:30 at the Methodist Church in Westminster. The MPC will be holding a small but very nice demonstration on the 8th of December when we expect the winter deaths figures to come out. Yeah. Every year they come out. They should be out in November, but they've been delayed like everything else. We'll be there on Parliament Square. Please join us. And I think if you are really, really interested in what the MPC does, come join us, but join some group. Join Fuel Poverty Action, join Keep Our NHS Public. All of these groups are working on your behalf and campaigning on your behalf. So don't sit there thinking you can't do anything. You can. One letter to an MP can absolutely make massive changes. So think about what your issues are, think about who you contact, think about who you join, and just do it because it feels good when you've done it.
Lovely. Thanks, Jan. Tom, have you got a quick last line before we sign off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything Jan said. I think the only thing I would add is just to say to people like that it is a really hard time for lots of people, and you're not alone. Like, there are services out there that can help you. Citizens Advice obviously is one of them, but there are lots of other specialist advice services as well. So like don't suffer alone, and do reach out. A good place to start is our website, but there is support out there, and there are people that can help you.
Lovely, thanks, Tom. And Belle?
And just to go on from what Jan was saying before, people are winning. And I like to talk about some of our trade unions who have won their fights for better pay. As you know, across a lot of different services, there have been massive pay cuts and big bosses attempting to bully people into accepting pay rises that aren't in line with inflation. But we've seen wins from the Dockers in Liverpool to the CWU communications workers with BT. They banded together, they fought together with their trade unions, and they've won. And when people do come together in that way, make a clear demand and have the support of their groups and communities, they can make a difference. And you know, as Jan said, so can you. So there is hope, and hopefully there'll be a general election soon.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much to our panel. Apologies for our slight technical difficulties and running over slightly, but hopefully you've enjoyed the session today. And I think we can all agree that we have had a wonderful discussion about a very difficult topic. But stay hopeful, stick together, and look after each other, I think, and take care. So there is help out there. So do seek it if you need it. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.